I am just so grateful for that incredible introduction. I had a couple of notes for him that he didn't include, like boldly, baldly handsome. But I do appreciate those overly generous words. And the reality is I'm very humbled to be here. And as I was going around talking to people and seeing some of the folks who are my heroes in this room, I just felt a sense of fellowship right now at a time that we all need it. And personally, I need it. When I walk around and see people that have been in this battle, not for a year, not for 2 years, but for decades, when I bump into people who were involved recently in organizing the Women's March, when I see old friends of mine like Barry Mattis, who literally pushed one of our best efforts in Newark, a tip line for people to report illegal guns, this is a room of fellowship and of faith. I want to be very personal in these remarks. You do not need a policy speech. I'd like to just talk to you from my heart. I have this belief in our country that if America has not broken your heart, then you don't love her enough. There are so many things that are happening on a daily basis that are heartbreaking. I look now around this country and it is so difficult for me sometimes to even contain my sense of anger, my sense of hurt, my sense of wanting to scream and yell about the challenges. And we see lots of things that are capturing the national attention, but what makes it hurt for me even more, and I still remember being in a small meeting of Democratic senators sitting next to Durbin after yet another mass shooting. And Senator Durbin and I just looked at each other and reminded the group that was there our reality. That we have mass shootings in America, if you look at what happens every single day, with dozens and dozens of people being shot and killed every single day. There was a horrible shooting of a congressperson and others on a baseball field, and I remember how it dominated the news, CNN coverage, wall-to-wall, Fox, and MSNBC. But something simmered in me as I felt a sense of outrage that you can't even be safe doing a game on a field. But the outrage in me was the fact that on my block, I live in the Central Ward of Newark, New Jersey. I'm the only senator that goes home to an inner city, low-income, majority-minority community. And around that same time, I had a shooting right across the street from where I live, where my brother and his wife lives, where my niece lives. And in my community, these shootings are still, with all the progress my home city is making, are still chillingly regular. I moved into this neighborhood for the first time back in 1997 and moved on to Martin Luther King Boulevard, which is about 100 yards from where I live right now. Within about a year, I would move into some high-rise projects called brick towers. In those buildings, we saw the scourge of gunfire. It's something that you know in cities all across America. You see the shrines on streets to dead children. You walk around and you see so many people that have personal stories, not just of shootings, but stories of the aftermath of those shootings. Literally, in Newark around July 4th, I began not to love that holiday perhaps as much as I should, because I knew when firecrackers go off, we would get calls to City Hall about parents who were staking those firecrackers for gunshots and what it does to traumatize or re-traumatize children. In the buildings in which I've lived, we saw tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. From a mom who, walking in her own neighborhood, was shot dead in front of her children, to the tenant president of my buildings, one of the most amazing women I've ever met in my life. We literally, right down the street from where I live now, we named the street after Miss Virginia Jones. Her son was murdered in the lobby of the building in which I lived. The painful thing about this is how the effect this all had on my dad. My dad was born poor to a single mom in Jim Crow South. And he once bemoaned to me that how could we live in a country where a child born under those circumstances would have a better chance of making it if they were born in 1936 than being born poor, black, in a segregated environment to a single mom now. Well, I met so many of those children that reminded me of my dad, but there's none that I met that inspired me the most as a young man named Hassan Washington. Hassan was one of these kids that, like my father, could light up a room. And Hassan was the leader of a small crew of boys, and I used to have a lot of good time talking to them and hanging out in the courtyard, playing basketball. They were the ones that kept me inspired in many ways. As they got older and got into high school, I would come home and they'd be hanging out late at night, and I would be staying in the lobby. Sometimes I'd bring food back and we would talk. One day I came in to the lobby, I think by this time they're juniors in high school, and I smelled something that I hadn't smelled as strong since I was at Stanford. Maybe why I've introduced bills to legalize the substance. But alarms went off, because I grew up in a suburb of New Jersey, Harrington Park, and went to schools like Stanford and Oxford and Yale. My dad used to get annoyed. He goes, "Boy, you got more degrees in the month of July, but you ain't hot." Serve some people. And there was just as much drug use there. But the margins in those communities are wide. But in an inner city community like Newark, it is a dangerous thing. One, because you're 4 times more likely to be arrested for it and to enter a criminal justice system that chews up children. But the other thing is the violence often associated with being involved with drugs. And so my alarms went off, and I started spending a little bit more time with the guys. I invited them out. I literally said, choose the movie, any movie you want to go see. Let's get out of these buildings and do something, which was a mistake, because they chose a movie. At first I thought it was about home construction called Saw. And I took them out to eat, to diner with my friends and some guys who had experimented with drugs and were talking to them. I started telling them that I was going to set up a mentoring program, but then I got busy, as we all do, because I was running for mayor of the city. And so I didn't get a chance to follow through with all the things and expectations I created with the young boys. But during my campaign, these young boys were always there when I would come home in a long day of campaigning. They would be in the lobby. They would be cheering me on. They'd be telling me, "Hey, man, we're going to vote for you. We're going to vote for you." And I knew they were not old enough to vote. One night I came home and they literally set up a parade. They had lawn signs and they were cheering my name with the title that I had dreamed about for years. They were cheering, "Mayor Booker, Mayor Booker, Mayor Booker." And I walked through like I was on a parade and then got in the elevator, and as it started creaking up to the 16th floor where I live, I suddenly thought to myself, wait a minute, where did they get those lawn signs from? Those things are expensive. I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to become mayor and I'm going to be able to help these kids. I'm going to be able to help all the kids. And indeed I won. But as soon as I won, we had word from the FBI that there were death threats and that I should take precautions. So I was mayor-elect, but I had wrapped security. And for the first time, these projects in a long time were crawling with police. And I came home and barely even noticed that the young guys, I don't care where you went to high school, you don't like hanging out where the cops are hanging out. And so I didn't see the kids, but I kept going with this sense of mission and this sense of vision about what I would do when I became mayor. And I swore my oath and I went after this job. And there were so many shootings in that first month. And I would show up to sidewalk after sidewalk, looking down at dead body after dead body. I would stand there and say, we are going to stop this. I would give street-level sermons to folks and let them know that we are better than this. We are going to overcome this violence. And then one day I was called to Court Street in Newark, down the street from where I live now, and it's right close to our downtown. And I arrived, it was about 1 month. I'm a newly minted mayor, and I arrive, and there is a body covered on the street, another one being loaded into the ambulance. I quickly go over to the police officers, get the basics of the situation, but it was in front of a senior citizen home, so I went right to work ministering to the living, letting them know what my plans were, what my ideas were, and how we're going to stop this. And I feel to this day this sense of guilt that a month into office, a dead body on the pavement had become almost normalized that I barely stopped to affirm the humanity that was there. I didn't even ask the names of the victims. I went home that night and I'm sitting in brick towers, the high rises in which I live, and trying to just steal a couple hours sleep before I got back to my duties as mayor. And I sit on that couch pulling out a BlackBerry and going through the emails and the reports for the day, and I see the police reports. And there I see the police report, homicide. And then I see the name. And the screen just seared into my eyes, the two words, Hassan Washington, the child from my lobby. There's a funeral home in Newark that I have been to in the most perverse way, the unnatural way. I've been there too many times for what has become an everyday American reality, a boy in a box. And then when I got to the funeral home, I know it so well, I asked which room, and the crowds were all descending into the basement. It is the worst room of all for me, because every time I went down those narrow staircases, creaky staircases, I felt like I was descending into the hull of a ship. And there we were, chained together in grief, moaning and wailing and swaying at that boy in a box, dead. As we descended into the depths of this injustice, of this wrong, the world kept going around. There were no cameras outside, no headlines. Another boy in a box. And I was the newly minted mayor. I thought to myself, I don't feel like the mayor. I feel shame pressing on my chest. I stood in the back of that room and people came over to me to shake my hand, but I couldn't be the comforter. I was leaning on the little bit of light from other people's eyes. And finally, I'm embarrassed to tell you, I couldn't stay. I turned to the security guard with me and I said, we got to get out of here. I ran up those rickety steps, jumped in my brand new SUV, ran off to City Hall. I didn't take the elevator because I didn't want to look anyone in the eyes. And I went right into that new grandeur of a mayor's office, slammed the door, locked it, and I sat down on my couch. And for the first time of what would be many times, as mayor of the city, I wept. I was broken. I was angry. I was angry at the world for seeming not to care about another black boy shot and killed in America. I was angry at myself. When my dad was born poor, black, to a single mom in a segregated environment, people were there for him, for his well-being, for his rights. Another family took him in. Others pushed him to college. In college, he saw thousands of Americans marching and protesting and fighting and dragging change to Washington to change civil rights laws and voting rights laws. Because of that wave, he became the first black man ever hired by a corporation, IBM, their first black salesman in the Virginia area, because of us. Because people who saw the destiny of this country wrapped up with a poor black kid born to a single mom in the South. And how did I repay those thousands of hands working for justice when God put a child right in front of me every night when I came home? I was too busy. I had too many big things and big plans. But one boy, yet another one boy died. And this hasn't changed. That was 2006. My lifetime. Born in 1969, 1.4 million Americans slaughtered. And while some of our shootings seem to stop this country for a moment, the challenge is the courageous empathy of this nation has been constipated. We're failing to see that this is not weeks or days passing punctuated by mass shooting every day. And it's not just the poor, not just the minority, it's women as well. 50 women every single month murdered by their intimate, by their partner, more than any other industrial nation. When I was fighting crime as a mayor every day, looking at our police reports, trying to drive down the murder rate, joining hands with folks in this room, outraged that I would talk to ATF agents at the highest levels, and they would pull me aside and say, Congress is starving our agency. We have had thousands of new agents in the last decade for Border Patrol, but only about 38 new ATF officers at a time that our mass shootings are going up. And as I'm mayor, looking at the problems, I don't understand. Close to 10% of my murders were women being shot by their intimates. And we couldn't get help. We couldn't even get the federal government to study the problem. Hundreds of studies about other illnesses and diseases, sometimes affecting less than 100 people. But here is something that has affected over 1 million people in my lifetime, and we could not get action. And so I stand here today where I feel my gut churn because I have not left that community. I see what this scourge of gun violence is doing, not just in the lives taken, but in the lives broken and the trauma inflicted. How it spins in cycles of violence where children are so afraid that they get suspended of school because they bought a screwdriver to protect themselves, or a knife, or feel like they need a gun themselves because nobody is protecting our children. And so I want to tell you right now, I stand here, my father told me before he died, we discussed it, that I was the physical manifestation of a conspiracy of love. If my father, who died 6 days before I was elected to the United States Senate, if he could have seen his son be the 4th elected African American to the Senate in the history of this country, he would have been tickled, because he and my mom believe that behind every successful child is an astonished parent. James Baldwin, at the end of The Fire Next Time, at the end of a painful book about my father's era, when our country was literally being torn apart, where cities were exploding in rage, Baldwin, at the end of The Fire Next Time, spoke of hope in an eloquence. If you have a chance, go read the last 2 pages of that book. He has the audacity to demand from us. And when he says us, he says the truly conscious blacks and the truly conscious whites, but I open it to all of the brilliant diversity of our nation. Baldwin said, everything we must assume is in our hands. And he proclaimed that human history is, and American Negro history is in particular, nothing less than a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible. My parents said they saw the darkest of days in our country's history, but they were fierce patriots because they believed that this nation's story was not one of perfection at its founding. Our documents reflect the savage bigotry and hate of the time. Native Americans are referred to as savages. Women aren't referred to at all. Second-class citizenship. Blacks, you remember Stokely Carmichael, all he could say was constitute. He used to say, I could only say 3/5 of the word. That's a rolling joke, you'll get it. But the brilliance of our nation is that we decided that we would break with the tradition of all countries. We are the oldest constitutional democracy. We said that we would be formed not by a nation that looks alike or prays alike or is descended from the same family tree. We are going to be a nation of ideals that are bigger than the geniuses that put them on paper. That we would be a country that puts ideals that are so inspiring that every generation would not give up on this country, but double down on this nation and fight to make those ideals real. And that if we were going to make it as a country, we had to have a different type of patriotism. Not the empty slogans of a politician, but a patriotism that was written about in the Declaration of Independence, when at the end of this Declaration about Independence, they end with these ideals of interdependence. They say the only way this country is going to make it a nation of ideas and principles and values is if we as a nation, they say, we must mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Patriotism is love, and you cannot love your country if you don't love your countrymen and women. And so now I call upon us, small group that we are, against the immensity of this problems. I rejoice in the fact that we are staying on it, that we are fighting, that we're unyielding. Alice Walker, who said, the real revolutionaries are always concerned with the least glamorous stuff, the raising a child's reading level from 3rd grade to 4th, to filling out food stamp forms because folks got to eat, revolution or not. The real revolutionaries always stay close enough to the people to be there for them when they're needed. This great organization is there for the people. I'm walking in here tonight and the leadership wants to talk to me about their programs to try to choke off the illegal weapons pouring into communities, because we know from Chicago to Newark, the guns are not coming from the states that have strong gun laws. They're pouring in from other states, driving levels of violence. This organization is concerned with the least glamorous stuff, but the real work of this democracy, ensuring that we have liberty and justice for all. And what is liberty? I will go home to Newark tonight, and my neighbors are shackled with fear, chained by the savagery of the circumstances that many wonder, who cares about us? What is liberty? What is the taste of liberty? What is the truth of liberty if everyone cannot enjoy it in our nation because of the scourge of fear? And so to the freedom fighters in this room, to the believers in love and love's demands and dictates, to those that know that patriotism is not words, it's not slogans, it's not salutes, that patriotism is work and it's sacrifice and it's service and it is love of your fellow American regardless of who they are, what they look like, how they pray, how much money they have in the pocket. To you in this room, I will leave you with the same message I received after a tragedy in this country. Tragedy in this country is not just when 50 people are gunned down at a concert and dozens are gunned down in a church. A tragedy in this country is any time one person, one child, another child was killed in my city. I was right there as he bled to death. It was one of those other times where this country breaks your heart. And this was a time when I was ready to give up. I was done. I remember being in my bathroom trying to scrub this boy's blood off my hands, trying to stop the blackness that was swallowing me up. I was feeling hatred, anger. I felt the words of this country were mocking me. We literally swear an oath that we'll be a country of liberty and justice for all, but yet another child. I remember taking my clothes off, his blood still on them, standing in the shower, and I know somebody in here has had this experience where you turn the water on so hot, so you just praying that the pain on your skin will blunt the pain in your heart. And I woke up the next morning and walked out of my building through the courtyard where Miss Virginia Jones's son was murdered, and I see this elderly woman, Miss Virginia Jones, in the courtyard. Her back is turned to me, and I stop. I feel like I'm 100 feet underwater, and I just stand there, and here this woman turns around, this woman who lost her own son in the building, who never left, never gave up, still held that building, those crumbling buildings together with the force of her love. All she did was look at me, our eyes met, and she said nothing. She just opened her arms like this, and I tell you, she is 5 feet and a smidgen tall, a small woman. I'm 6'3", 250 on a good day. And I ran across that courtyard like a little boy and felt like I leapt up into her arms, and she held me. She started rubbing my back, and she said two things over and over again, two words that have nothing to do about religion or pie in the sky when you're dead. It has to do about now and this moment and what this point in history calls for. Two words, she repeated them over and over again, and I leave them with you. Those two words that I repeated after Newtown, after Vegas, after Texas, I repeat them over and over again. It's what you all are showing. It's what we must continue doing. It is the cost of saying those four words, I am an American, because that demands something. As I let loose and cried onto Miss Jones's shoulder, she rubbed my back and said over and over again, stay faithful, stay faithful, stay faithful. We are the nation that has achieved impossible things. We must stay faithful. We're a country that has ripped down the worst obstacles. We've torn down hate and brought love. We've broken shackles and chains and brought liberty and freedom. We must stay faithful. We are the nation that from its founding has always said the power of the people is greater than the people in power. We must stay faithful. We are the nation where our leaders said that change will never roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but it must be carried in on the backs of soldiers like us. We must stay faithful. We are the nation where it's called to repent, as King said, not for the vitriolic words and the violent actions of the bad people, but the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. We must stay faithful in our work. And I know in my heart that this battle seems tough. We have forces aligned against us. There's millions and millions of dollars trying to stop us, but I know our history. I know our spirit. And if we stay faithful, we will end the scourge of gun violence in our country. God bless you, and God bless America.